I'm going to be talking about the Bendowa today from the title slide. Um, so I'll kind of explain more about what the Bendowa is in a couple minutes. But the intent here is really to review the content, and I'm going to pull out some key themes that I think are valuable. Dogen is notorious for being difficult to read and highly technical. So my my goal is to kind of just provide some editorial commentary and processing of what Dogen's actually written to help pull out those key themes and make it a little bit more intelligible, or at least attempt to do that as best I can. So I think we probably have a diversity of people in attendance today. Some people who, you know, have been practicing together for years and years, and probably some folks who this is your first time, and maybe you are new to Zen Buddhism. So I just want to provide a really brief foundation about like who is Dogen and what are we talking about to provide context. So Dogen was a monk who lived in Japan about 800 years ago and is the founder of the Soto school of Zen Buddhism in Japan and really in America too. So this is our lineage at MZMC is the Soto school of Zen, and that's one of two kind of dominant schools of Zen in Japan. The other being Rinzai. And so, like I said, Dogen was a prolific writer and was highly technical and complex, and I'm a huge admirer of his thinking. I think he's brilliant, but it's not always that easy to tell what he's actually thinking. So I'll talk really briefly about Dogen's story, again just to provide some context. So the Shobogenzo is like Dogen's magnum opus. So Dogen was a prolific writer and wrote lots of things, many of which were consolidated into the Shobogenzo. Usually it's translated into English as the Treasury of the True Dharma Eye. And there were actually several different versions of the Shobogenzo that were compiled at various different points in time with different chapters or fascicles. They actually have a special word in this context, but they're basically like chapters. You can think of them that way. And the Bendowa was not included in actually the original Shobogenzo, which had 75 fascicles and was compiled a few decades after Dogen's death. It was discovered in the 1600s in Kyoto and was, after it was understood and reviewed, it was actually included as the first fascicle in the full 95 fascicle version of the Shobogenzo, which is today, probably considered to be the most authoritative version. And so I just mentioned that because I think it's important that it was added as the first fascicle. And many people say that the Bendowa includes the essence of the entire Shobogenzo, or the essence of all of Dogen's thinking. And I think, fundamentally, that's true. I think it's a really good introduction and makes sense to include right at the beginning. And is actually, relative to a lot of Dogen's writings, I would say pretty accessible. He does use some kind of plain language in there, but of course there is some kind of trippy stuff as well. And also worth noting that so Dogen wrote this when he was 31, right after returning from China, and it was his first writing ever in the Japanese language. And this was a big innovation, and I think says a lot about Dogen's approach to sharing the Dharma. Prior to this, basically all writings about Buddhism in Japan were done in Chinese, actually, because there was a lot of reverence for the Chinese and their culture and their tradition, not just with regard to Zen, but generally. But Dogen really wanted to do something uniquely Japanese and to popularize the style of practice in Japan. So it was written in Japanese. Okay, so Um, I think there are probably. Huh, okay. So I think there are two key themes that we can pull out when we look at the Bendowa. Now, it's important for me to admit that some of Dogen's thinking on these different subjects does evolve in his later writings, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm just focusing on the Bendowa today and his thinking as it is represented in the Bendowa. But just to be fully transparent, this, when I say Dogen says this, in some cases later on he may say something different or he may tweak it a little bit. So having said that, I think there are really two overarching themes that we can discern from the Bendowa. The first is that for Dogen, the practice of Zazen, so seated meditation, is paramount. It's the Zen tradition, so Zazen had always been of primary importance, going back to the founding of Zen in China. Uh, and that's true for Dogen, and perhaps especially true for Dogen. It even takes on the flavor of kind of a sacrament almost. So he's really serious about this, and so I'm going to dig into that a little bit and provide some quotes to explain his thinking there, and also play with that a little bit and think about how we can view that from our perspective as modern day Americans, and how we can try to make that useful. And then the second point, which is crucial to include with the first, is that Zazen is for everyone. So Dogen definitely has, I would say, almost like a populist message about this. He really wants to make a really strong and rigorous case that Zazen is kind of our birthright as humans, as sentient beings, and it's something that we can all do. So the first point, okay, so for Dogen, Zazen is important. Um, so a little bit of additional like background here, I think, is useful. So in Dogen's story, there's this event that I think is, uh, you know, probably the most important piece and gets talked about a lot. So Dogen went to China, and he had in search of the pure perfect dharma. He was unsatisfied with Buddhism as it existed in Japan at the time, and so went to China in search of a teacher and to learn more about practice. And it is said that there was a burning question that Dogen had that was the impetus for that led him to do that. And that question was, to paraphrase, if we are all already enlightened, deep down, if we all already have Buddha nature, why do we need to practice Zazen, or practice anything for that matter, or do anything? I mean, it could actually be viewed in kind of a nihilistic way. And this was a prevailing or a normative common way of thinking at the time in the Tendai school of Buddhism, that we kind of have this innate Buddha nature, and that's it. Therefore we don't really need to do anything else. So Dogen went on a boat from Japan to China, which was a really big journey at the time. This is a big deal. It's not something that you did lightly. And he spent a few years there, moving around and learning from different teachers, and finally arrived at a monastery that had a teacher, Ju Qing, who he really clicked with and had a really great teaching. And so Dogen continued to study with Ju Qing and received transmission from him in the Soto lineage, which he then brought back to Japan with an answer to his question. And so that answer is, and to quote the Bendowa, the Dharma is abundantly present in each human being, true enough, but if we don't practice it, it doesn't manifest itself. And if we don't experience it, it can't be realized. So fundamentally, he's not disagreeing with that perspective that we all have innate Buddha nature. I think he's validating it. But he's saying that without practice, and without the practice of Zazen, we don't know. We don't get to feel or experience that Buddha nature. And since it's inherent within each of us, um, don't we want to try to tap into that? So that to summarize, that's what he found. So he came back to Japan with this message, and goes further in the Bendowa in his praises for Zazen. So okay, so not to be beat a dead horse or be reiterative, but I think it's worth looking at some of his language and extracting some quotes from it just to see how seriously he took this. So um, Dogen says, after the initial meeting with the teacher, we never again need to burn incense, to do prostrations, to recite the Buddha's name, to practice confession, or to read sutras. Just sit and get the state which is free of body and mind. So, later on, he says that, you can keep a Zazen mind while doing everything, right? So he's not saying that you should never do these other practices, but he's saying that really the thing that's necessary is to do Zazen. And he gets really trippy. And so this is kind of a famous quote from the Bendowa, and I'm actually going to read the whole thing because I think it's so cool. But it starts with what's on the slide here. So, if a human being, even for a single moment, manifests the Buddha's posture, while that person sits up straight in samadhi, the entire world of Dharma assumes the Buddha posture, and the whole of space becomes the state of realization. The practice thus increases the Dharma joy that is the original state of the Buddha Tathagatas and renews the splendor of their realization of the truth. Furthermore, throughout the Dharma worlds, in 10 directions, ordinary beings of the 3 states and the 6 states all become clear and pure in body and mind at once. They experience the state of great liberation, and their original features appear. Then, all dharmas experience and understand right realization, and myriad things each put their Buddhist body into practice. In an instant, they totally transcend the limits of experience and understanding. They sit erect as kings of the Bodhi tree. In one moment, they turn the great Dharma wheel, which is in the unequaled state of equilibrium, and they expound the ultimate, unadorned, and profound state of prajna. So he means something here, something serious. This isn't just a metaphor. So for any of us, maybe you didn't know you were doing that when you sat Zazen for 1 minute, but you are, by just sitting in meditation, you're allowing the entire world around you to manifest its true nature. So that's pretty trippy and pretty religious and pretty cosmic, and maybe, I don't know, kind of hard to make sense of. But after this, so Dogen starts with this, with the cosmic and religious and trippy stuff. After that, he circles back and he says, you know what? And by the way, Zazen will actually help you calm down and get into a state of meditation as well. So those balanced and right states of realization also work the other way, following paths of intimate and mystical cooperation, so that this person who sits in Zazen steadfastly gets free of body and mind and understands the natural and pure Buddha Dharma. So, he comes back later to make the point, which is probably the more direct one, which is that, through this practice, we can access calmness. We can touch that Buddha nature that's inside of us. In addition to liberating all beings everywhere throughout space and time. So it does both simultaneously. Okay, so I'll I'll pause with the Dogen quotes for a minute, and I think we can just kind of sit back and think about this a little bit. So, um, how do we make use of this? Well, like I said at the beginning, I think we probably have a people with a diversity of experience on the call today who maybe have lots of experience doing zazen and kind of maybe get what Dogen is saying, and some people who are maybe brand new, or maybe this is your first time calling in. And thinking about my own personal experience, I was first interested in Zen and meditation and Buddhism when I was 19. And I really thought it was cool and wanted to do it. And it really, took me about 5 years to develop a daily meditation practice. It can be hard, right? It can be hard to pick up meditation. So I spent 5 years. I read a lot of books about Buddhism, and I visited a number of different Zen centers, but never really stuck with it at any of those that I visited during that time. And tried to sit zazen for myself and by myself, and sometimes I would do it, maybe for a few days in a row if I was lucky, and then I might not do it for a month because my life got in the way, and I didn't really have a lot of structure behind it. It was just like a solo project that I had picked up. And if you think about, like, if you wanted to, for example, like learn Russian on your own, you could probably do it. Like, I'm sure there are people who have done that, but it's really hard. And it's much easier if you take a Russian class or go to Russia and immerse yourself. And so, just to share a little bit more about my own, personal story and example. So, when I came to Zen Center, uh, I landed in a community that had lots of different programmatic offerings. So lots of different ways you could do zazen. There's morning zazen, evening zazen, Sunday programming like we're doing now, Saturday zazen, lots of different retreats and different types of retreats. Some that are long and rigorous, and some that are just kind of a short taste of the retreat practice. And so, for me, having a community and some structure like that supported me in actually executing on this kind of deep desire and interest that I had had for a while. And so I think that's important. So I use the analogy of Russian speakers, but I think this is true for meditation. I think there are maybe some very special people, like the Buddha, who just did this on their own, but I think most of us need some structure and need a community and need other people to support us, and that's really our goal here, is to do that. So, um, for what it's worth, if any of you are in a position that I was in during that period, and could use some support, that's what we're here for. So the first point that Dogen makes, that zazen is so important, I think, is insufficient without the second theme, which is that, like, everyone can do this. And Dogen makes this argument in a number of different ways, that I think just show how strongly he believed this. So I'm going to just go through a number of those, and I think it tells a kind of interesting story and gives us some insight into what his thinking was. So, first of all, he pretty clearly says that zazen is for both monks and lay people equally. So to quote Dogen, this practice rests only upon whether or not the will is present. It doesn't relate to whether the body stays at home or leaves home. So leaving home is a term that's used for ordination, or basically becoming a monk. So it doesn't matter whether the body stays at home or leaves home. Those who think that worldly affairs hinder the Buddha Dharma only know that there is no Buddha Dharma in the world. They don't know that there are no worldly dharmas in the state of Buddha. So this is Dogen being Dogen. I can do my best to try to explain this second part a little bit because I think it's not totally clear. So those who think that worldly affairs hinder the Buddha Dharma. So you know, especially in America, this is really relevant. What we're trying to do here. We're doing something that is novel. Traditionally, Buddhist communities were really bifurcated into a monastic group and a lay group. And in America, in a lot of ways, we're kind of integrating the two, or splitting the difference, maybe, and learning how to practice, in the midst of our normal everyday lives. So, I have a day job. I think most teachers at Zen Center also have day jobs, and families, and busy lives. And he's simply making the point that all that stuff um, is Buddha, and doesn't hinder our practice. We don't need to eliminate it or get rid of it. That it can be supportive and helpful in our practice. And to flip the same concept around in the final sentence, they do not know that there are no worldly dharmas in the state of Buddha. So in the state of Buddha, um, everything is Buddha, right? There's nothing is tarnished. There's no defilement found within it. In the state of Buddha, everything is the state of Buddha. So to conclude, this is for everyone, not just for monks. He even goes so far as to say that you don't need to be a Buddhist to practice Zazen. So in Japan, there's really two predominating religions. There's Buddhism of various different flavors and sects, and there's Shinto, which is an indigenous Japanese religion. And so Dogen says, this is why when Shintoists of yin and yang come to devote themselves, and when Arhat, so Arhat is like an esteemed Buddhist practitioner. So when Shintoists come to devote themselves, and when Arhats who have experienced the effect come to ask for Dharma, we give each of them, without fail, the means of clarifying the mental state. So the teaching is the same. The teaching is the same. And so, I think we're pretty ecumenical at Zen Center. And um, I'm personally not super big into labels, like if someone is a Buddhist or not a Buddhist. So um, I am inclined to agree with Dogen here, and I think it's legit. This practice will benefit anyone of any religious background or no religious background. I believe that to be true. But I still I have a deep special place in my heart for Buddhism. Okay, so I'm taking a small liberty here, but my takeaway from this excerpt from the Bendowa is that Americans can also practice zazen. So I think I don't really hear people talk like this anymore. Maybe this is a little bit old fashioned, but there is some line of thinking that's like, oh, people trying to do Buddhism in America are kind of posers. And it's, they're not doing it right, and it's inauthentic. And if you really want real Buddhism, you need to go to Asia. um, I really disagree with that. I've practiced in Japan. I've spent a short amount of time in a Japanese monastery, which was awesome. And they had really sincere practice, but so do a lot of Americans. And at the time when Dogen wrote this, they thought of Japan like America. So they thought that, oh, in China and India, they really do the real Buddhism, and all these people in Japan don't know what they're doing, and they're just kind of copying and not doing it right, which is interesting, right? Because maybe we think the opposite about Japan nowadays. Just because our country is not a nation of benevolence or wisdom, and the people are dull witted, do not think that it's impossible for us to grasp the Buddha Dharma. Still more, all human beings have the right seeds of prajna in abundance. In abundance. So, I think this is pretty cool what we're doing in America, and I think is uniquely adapted and suited to all our culture and our proclivities, and I think is probably more useful for us than um, you know super traditional Buddhism as it might be practiced in Japan or China or wherever. Okay, very important. Beginners can practice zazen and can do so successfully. And I mean, it's kind of weird to talk about zazen being a success or not, but I just say that because I mean, of course, anybody can like sit down on a cushion, but one might ask, like, well, if you're really a beginner, it can be kind of maybe there's a learning curve at first, or maybe when you first sit down in zazen, um, it I don't know, maybe it's lots of mental activity and a little bit chaotic and physically uncomfortable, maybe, and kind of hard to settle down. And Dogen is saying you can do it, and doing that is doing it, right? Sitting down for the first time, or the second time, or the third time, or the 10,000th time, um, is the whole thing, right? You're doing it fully every time you sit down in zazen, right? With no exception. So to quote Dogen, a beginner's pursuit of the truth is just the whole body of the original state of enlightenment. We who are beginners, Dogen is including himself in this as a beginner, we who are beginners in pursuing the truth directly possess, in the state without intention, a share of the original enlightenment. And then, to kind of encapsulate all of these different equivalencies that Dogen is making, bottom line, everyone can do zazen. So for everyone, it is completely the same practice and the same enlightenment, completely the same. So Dogen's enlightenment and all the Chinese ancestors' enlightenment and the Buddha's enlightenment and our enlightenment is completely the same practice and the same enlightenment. So Dogen almost always does this to include both practice and enlightenment, which he believes to be in union and not two separate things. So, this is reflected in what I was saying a minute ago. Um, that just the act of sitting is the whole deal, right? So practice is enlightenment. We're manifesting enlightenment through practice, and actually, there's no other way to do it. So for everyone, it's completely the same practice and the same enlightenment. Even if the countless Buddhas in 10 directions, as numerous as the sands of the Ganges, tried with all their power and all their Buddha wisdom to calculate or comprehend the merit of one person's zazen, they could not even get close, right? So, the merit of everyone's zazen, right? Everywhere throughout space and time, everyone who was doing zazen, half an hour ago, the merit is boundless. It's inconceivable, and is even inconceivable to the whole pantheon of Buddhas and ancestors. That's how vast it is. And so, just I don't know. There's a lot of quotes in the Bendowa, particularly towards the end, that I think are really motivating and inspiring, and I wanted to include them all, but I thought that would be overkill. So I've just pulled out one here that I think is nice and kind of cute. And in the second half of the Bendowa, there's this question and answer thing, which is like very common in Buddhist texts, where they will have somebody from the audience, and I'm not sure if these were real questions or if they're kind of a literary foil that was stood up so that Dogen or could make his different points, or whenever this happens, I always wonder, but it's neither here nor there. um you know, somebody asks him, I don't know, so Dogen, so what's the deal with Zazen? And this time he doesn't give a cosmic trippy answer about the, merit of countless Buddhas throughout space and time. He gives a very practical answer, which I think, lots of people can probably relate to, and I think is probably just as good of a rationale as any of the preceding stuff. So what Buddhist practice is reason in itself. We shouldn't look for a reason beyond this. So the reason to do it is just to do it. It's not cause and effect. It's not to get some reward later or to get enlightenment later. The It's self-justifying. The motivation to practice is simply to practice. And then he goes on to say, but in conclusion, the reason may be that of the four forms of conduct, sitting is the most peaceful and joyful. And I don't know. I I think that's pretty intuitive, and I have definitely felt that. Sitting can be very peaceful and joyful. Not to say that it's not difficult sometimes, or it can't be unpleasant at times, but it can also provide great peace and great joy. And so this is a very practical justification for the practice of zazen, is simply that it's enjoyable. And I think that certainly true for me. I wouldn't still be doing it if I didn't enjoy it, right? If I didn't benefit and get some pleasure from it. And I think that's probably true for a lot of us. So